I wanted to talk to Jared Ball, professor, media, political activist, and somebody who wrote a book several years ago, called I Mix What I Like. I wanted to have Jared on again. We interviewed him when he first put this book out, but I think at the date and time that we are in, it would be beneficial if we revisit some of the concepts that Jared had put in this book. And I want to encourage people to look at them and really take them in. And the reason why, and I told Jared this, is that when he first put out the book, the response to some of what he was saying, I don't think was fully appreciated, in the sense that people thought that they could just go on the internet. Hey, I could go on the internet and I don't have to worry about traditional media. But now what we're seeing, the very concepts that he was talking about in terms of power dynamics, is definitely playing itself out in a very insidious and very nefarious way on the internet. And I think now we can clearly see what the brother was really trying to get across. So, Jared, welcome back to the show, and how you doing today?
Always, I'm as good as could be expected, as always, and also, as always, it's a pleasure to be on with you. I appreciate that, and appreciate your work. So it's good, man.
Let's talk about I Mix What I Like. It was really, I think people, when they saw the title, saw it as a mixtape thing, and they thought that you were going to be very surface-oriented. Let's talk about mixtapes and who made them and how to use them as a tool of promotion. But you really framed this in terms of colonization, the attempt to keep the status quo of empire, and how media was operating. So let's go through some of the main concepts. If you had to, talking to people today in 2019 versus when you did this book back in 2011, what are two or three aspects that you absolutely think people need to pay close attention to?
Well, first is that the title, I Mix What I Like, is a tribute to Steve Biko, the legendary assassinated revolutionary out of Tanzania or South Africa, who had written a column of journalism encouraging black consciousness and unity and radicalism, sort of an underground newspaper column titled I Write What I Like. So what I was just trying to do was to borrow from his inspiration and a lot of the framework that he applied to his work to our situation here and in the context of hip-hop and the mixtape, which for me had been personally a transformative medium, and for hip-hop itself had been a transformative medium. So I was just trying to isolate the mixtape, which I think still has not gotten its proper attention in terms of hip-hop history and focus and study. But I was just trying to isolate the tradition and the history of the mixtape as exposing the real relationship that black and brown people have to the United States, which is, as I was arguing and still argue, one more of internal colonialism than something akin to citizenship and democracy, etc. So I was basically just trying to argue that the tradition of theoretically applying colonialism to Black America and Latinx America should be extended in hip hop to the mixtape and to the study of a hip hop nation that should, I think, still see itself as colonized. And then to understand what that relationship means, and then in that context, try to identify what role media play. So I was just trying to say that if you look at the history of the mixtape, you see something more important, that you see a relationship that underground communication and alternative forms of communication and media have always played and should play, and that we should look skeptically at new media and new technology because historically they have accompanied not only consolidation and ownership of that media technology, but consolidation of ownership of the wealth that society produces. And there's a long historical trend showing that. So I was just simply saying, one is a shout out to the mixtape. Let's just, appreciate some of that history and tradition, but more importantly, let's use it to help us understand what's happening now and coming, and what is the relationship that we have to this state and to its media apparatus, because that'll tell us a lot about what's coming next. And I think, as you were pointing out, what we're seeing now with the internet and the media and new media technology is bearing that out. As new media technology comes out and media, rolls itself out, it becomes increasingly consolidated in ownership and more pervasive and more powerful and more threatening to all the political movements that I think many of us continue to be inspired by and try to support and participate in.
For people who are, don't know, how do you explain the mixtape? What made it so important in terms of, well, I'll let you explain it. What made the mixtape and what is it? And what made it important and it?
And again, I learned a lot from you and other hip hop historians and people who put this history out in many different ways. I just wanted it to get more focus and attention. And, the mixtape was essential to the birth and expansion of rap music and DJ culture. And that, when we didn't have access to radio and as you and others have pointed out, importantly, black radio too didn't want to play us. Rap music was not welcome. Hip hop in general was seen as, with all of its elements, as a general threat to society, and to the extent that it was seen as not just something that was going to pass on by as a fad. So really the only way for DJs to disseminate and for artists to get their music disseminated was through cassettes and eventually CDs. But through cassettes that would be sometimes personally made by a DJ for a local superstar, or would be recordings of DJ performances at parties and clubs and then resold and distributed. And then it would, burgeon, of course, starting in New York City and all the boroughs there. But, even a corny kid like me growing up in the suburbs of Maryland could eventually get these mixtapes delivered down to me and be walking around my neighborhood with a boom box listening to the latest from, whoever. I mean, at the time for me, probably Kid Capri was the biggest superstar. But so in other words, as others, and I believe her name is Angela Ash, I believe is her name. I would credit her in the work, but she was the one that pointed out that the mixtape was, or Ards, I think was her name, Ards, was pointing out that hip hop was, I think she called it, the mixtape rather was hip hop's first mass medium. And that, so I was just arguing it was the original. So I just was trying to argue it was to be compared to other national mediums or media that helped nations evolve historically and within colonies, most often compared to radio. So I was, so the mixtape was essential. And then as it became, as corporations became increasingly involved and used it to market and underground market, et cetera, and so forth, it changed. And certain DJs, DJ Clue obviously had a major role in changing sort of the format and devolving the role of the skill of the DJ and more into just getting unreleased tracks, etc. But all of it was just important, and the culture. So if people go back and listen, I mean, the mixtape gets so many shout outs, in tracks from legends, just reminding us that it was essential as a medium. And a way for hip-hop to blow up. And without the mixtape, hip-hop or rap music would not have expanded or been able to expand in ways that it did, because it eventually, I mean, I even would meet people, the brother that did the last version of the intro for I Mix What I Like is an MC from Prophets of the City and the legendary South African rap group, and in his story, they talk about it was the mixtapes getting passed throughout the continent of Africa, even as either artists went on tour or people just got copies of things sent around that helped hip hop expand for him and his crew over there. So I mean, the mixtape was enormously valuable in the expansion of the art and the culture, but I think if you look at that history and that it had to emerge as an unsanctioned form of communication because it was coming out of a colonized situation. It was coming out, and then it sort of also explains the role that national and particularly commercial media play in limiting what we hear and what we have access to culturally in terms of news and other ideas, etc. That was my argument then, and still to this day, that if we look at the history of the mixtape, it will explain so much about our relationship to the nations we're in, to the countries we're in, to the communities we're in, and to the media environment that we're in. So I, that was, what I was trying to do with that book for sure.
That's the voice of Jared Ball, professor, who we're talking to right now over at Morgan State, revisiting his book, I Mix What I Like, and looking at the current media landscape. Jared, at the heart of what I hear you saying is with the mixtape. It was independent media, and it was really about self-determination, meaning that I'm not confined to anything. I'm gonna take music, whether it's copywritten or not. I'm gonna place it in a way that makes sense for the audience you're communicating with. I'm gonna have information and messaging and bringing awareness to, whether it's a performance by a popular DJ or new music from a popular, from an up and coming artist. These were things that were, as you just said, unsanctioned. I think the brilliance of the book, and this is where I really want, hopefully you can break down the concept, is, chapters 2 and 3. When you talk about the colonial music model and you talk about media as ideology, culture, and colonialism. And I think one of the things that stood out is that you talked about in the mainstream media, it eventually, will situate everything from celebrityism to messaging to protect the empire. And I think we can now see that a lot more clear. But can you dwell into those 2 chapters a little bit more and break that down as to what we need to pay attention to?
Well, we're just trying to point out that it's important that we look past really what is propaganda that conditions us to see media as just simply entertainment or something light or innocuous or something that's just around or at best, or maybe, something that's helpful. And we don't realize, and I always quote it all the time when Marshall McLuhan said that we know that we don't know who discovered water, but we know it was not the fish, because an all-pervasive environment is always beyond perception. And I think that we as fish, we have been created as fish who are born into an environment that we don't understand has been constructed by political forces that are often hostile to our own interests. So I'm often accused of being a little extreme with it, but I really think that we have to look very critically at what we like more than what we don't like, and we have to ask why it's being provided. And we should often, I have increasingly argued, we should reject any idea that we should look for ourselves in commercial media. We should reject all of that, even when we like it, because there's some other nefarious force involved. And usually I start with just the idea of advertising. So as we look at a lot of the leading media scholars, more critical media scholars, their argument with a vast amount of evidence shows that, as Chris Simpson points out, that it's through propaganda that the elite primarily communicate with us, and that's primarily carried out through advertising. Advertising controls almost all of the content of our music, of our shows, of our movies, and we don't even necessarily realize that, making individual ownership irrelevant. And this is why when I was coming up and learning a lot about this, from you and others, and we would look at Radio 1 and this national black radio network owned by, at the time, a black woman, Kathy Hughes, and a lot of us would point out, well, the output of her product was identical to that of any other. And it became increasingly clear to many of us, at least, that had nothing to do with her necessarily as an individual, but more with the fact that the commercial media landscape is determined by advertisers, not necessarily by even ownership. So if you want to be viable, you have to seek out advertising dollars, and this is why advertisers spend hundreds of billions of dollars every year, not just to sell us products, but to sell us ideas about the way the world should be organized. I mean, when you see a commercial for a hamburger, it's not just trying to make you hungry to sell a hamburger. It's trying to make all of us accept even the idea of commercial food, of mass marketing and mass commercial distribution of beef, for instance. I mean, without questioning how the process of that burger is arranged and to whose benefit. And media do the same thing. So I was just trying to say that, and still trying to say that, we have to look very carefully at, and ask serious questions about who owns our media environment and for what reasons. And when I look at the music industry, we were just looking at it in my classes last week. Why does Len Blavatnik, a Ukrainian or a Belarusian, I believe, international conglomerate owner of Access Industries, own the third largest music record label, Warner Music, when it's only, I think, not even 1% of his overall portfolio. It can't just be for money. I mean, we're often told it's just for money, and I'm arguing that just like media don't exist just for a profit model of making money, but exist to manage our public opinion and our ideas and to limit the range of our ideas and our conversation. This is why I think the elite want to be involved with even our music and setting what is our pop culture. It is they who largely determine what songs we like. When we look closely at the industry, we often see that it's 50-year-old white men writing songs for children to sing to other children. And we have to, ask, why is that? And when we look again at the commercial arrangement, I argue it can't just be for money because, the amounts of money being made are enormous, but they're ultimately, relatively small when we look at their role in the conglomerates that are actually owning them. And then just finally, I would just say that when we look at even social media and the latest news with Facebook and all of that, and we're looking at Facebook, I think just last year had about $1 billion+ in ad revenue, both in buying and selling ads. We have to really understand that even our social media space is there to manage our public opinion. It's not there to make us feel better. And when we remember, of course, that the internet is itself, Pentagon, Defense Department, military technology, now commercialized and weaponized to commercialize a consumer target, we can start to maybe understand a little bit more about what's going on and what's meant to be happening here.
It's interesting. One of the things that stood out is that, and I'm just kind of paraphrasing, that in reading your book, that if you watch popular media, it eventually keeps you within the confines of the empire. So, for example, there's a lot of praise that is being heaped up on Regina King, very popular sister who put out this, stars in this movie or series on HBO called Watchmen. And we're very excited. I mean, there's a lot of praise because she shows the Tulsa, massacre, that took place in 1921. And so while she is getting praise, simultaneously, and this goes back, this is what really stood out to me, she shows the resolution of that massacre is, black folks teaming up with the police, which definitely didn't happen historically. And it erases the history of the fact that black people formed their own security force in the aftermath. And so I looked at that and I was like, oh, wow, Jared wasn't kidding, because at the end of the day, instead of having people, even in this popular situation that is a fantasy that borrows from reality where you could free yourself, you're eventually brought back to the confines of the empire. And you start to see that over and over again. Can you speak to that? Because that seems like something we kind of overlook when it's a black or brown face telling the story. But at the end of the day, it eventually brings us back to square one. Even in Panther, as we even debated, at the end of the day, one of the heroes in that is the FBI or the CIA agent, and we know the history of that.
Well, I hope we do, and I think increasingly that's becoming harder to identify, but which is sort of, I think, part of the point that you're getting at, that this is really the point I kind of glossed over a minute ago. When we like something, I think we have to be more critical of it. When we see an actor or an actress that we like, or a story that we're interested in, and I don't, I'm involved in it as anybody. I have all of my guilty pleasures, and I'm caught up in as much nonsense as anybody else. We just have to be more critical of why it is we're being offered it, and what messages are embedded in even what we think we like. And then really we should step back and ask, why am I liking this? Why do I like what I like? But essentially, I mean, if we step back again, and I keep always thinking of this the book National Security Cinema. It came out a couple of years ago, and one of the things it points out is I think there's about almost 2,000 television and films written and produced and directed by our national intelligence agencies over the last, I don't know, decade or so.
Wait a second. Repeat that again? Whoa. Repeat that very slowly again.
Well, first I want to cite the book so people can check me on and catch me on these numbers. But so it's National Security Cinema, co-authored by Alfred, I believe, is one of the author's last names. And it points out, first of all, the book is about how much of our popular so-called entertainment is produced by the national security state. And in fact, even the name CIA, you mentioned that just a minute ago, the first time that the phrase Central Intelligence Agency is actually ever mentioned is in a Hollywood film before the CIA changes its name from the Office of Special Services, the OSS. So the CIA was, so the point that they're getting at with this book is that there has never been a separation between our dominant popular media and the intelligence agencies of our society. And then they point out specifically going through many of our popular shows, from Homeland to any number of police shows to all kinds, have been literally written by either current or former intelligence agency agents and operatives. They've written the scripts. They've been directors and producers. And I think the number is about 1,900 to 2,000. I mean, it's an enormous amount. So that's why so many television shows frame the police in some sort of positive way. And even when there's a negative or a bad cop, they're often described as the bad apple who are caught by better police. That's why we get so many stories told from the perspective of prosecutors and FBI agents. I mean, it's been an endless, if you just even think about, particularly as men in our age group, if we think about how much TV we've grown up on, going back to the 70s, that have been, centering rather the police or some intelligence agency, or the military, of course, which has its own Pentagon liaison office with liaisoning with Hollywood to make sure that we're about to see Top Gun Part 2 come out. When I joined the Navy in 1989, I was laughed at as a Top Gun recruit because it was argued that we were joining because we had seen the first Top Gun. And now we see Top Gun 2 is about to come out in 2020, having meant to have the same impact. And I'm sure if we look, and I haven't done it yet, but I'm sure if we look, we will see that there's some relationship between the United States military, the Navy in particular, and this film. So in other words, so much of what is surrounding us and encouraging us to see the world in a certain way, and it does not have a little impact, is what I'm arguing. I mean, when people watch these shows and watch these films, we all are moved. Our political opinion, public opinion, our political opinion, our ideas of the world are indeed being shaped and encouraged in certain directions. Whether we like it or not, whether we're always aware of it or not, or at least we should be aware that is the intent of the people creating it. Even when we think we're not succumbing to the messaging, we should at least be aware that is the goal. That is why it's there, to manage and limit our public opinion, ultimately so we don't raise certain questions about the arrangements of our world.
Let me ask you this, Jared. In what you're describing, do you feel that people who would write a script, black, white, or whoever, that supports the status quo, is it really coming from a perspective of like they're sitting in a dark room huddled over with some, unknown, unnamed power brokers who say, Jared, just using you as an example, make sure you have the cops, CIA, FBI, look good at the end of the day. Don't transform them and make them become something that people are no longer respecting or afraid of? Or do you feel that there's so much baked into the DNA of pop culture that we actually fulfill that mission, even if we don't realize we're fulfilling it?
I mean, there are some back rooms for sure. I mean, there are boardrooms and executive boardrooms, and they do meet, and there are, ratings boards. People don't understand often how the ratings of films works. And if you don't get, if you get an X rating versus an R rating. Your film doesn't show up in theaters and it disappears. You don't make any money. And to get that rating, you're subjected to a board, and people don't even know who's on the board or who constitutes the board. And when people have done investigations, they find that it's, a limited amount of usually wealthy, white or more affluent white men, but some women, and then some religious, mostly Catholic and Episcopalian church leaders sitting in this room, unknown and somewhat anonymous, judging these films. So there is some of that for sure. But most of it is, you say baked into the DNA. On the one hand, it's baked into the DNA for sure when it's being literally written by people who have that perspective coming out of the intelligence agencies and the military. But then the procedure, the process has it baked in the sense that if you want to make a film that is about war or so-called terrorism or whatever, and you want to use aircraft carriers or tanks or jets or something that looks official, you have to get it signed off on by the Pentagon. So you're going to, without maybe thinking about it, construct a narrative that makes them look better. They also have to sign off on the script, and they see the film before it comes out anyway. So the Pentagon, will literally tell you if they want to see changes that you have to make. And then a lot of it is, as I've argued with entertainment, so-called entertainment, is that when you show young people a model of success without telling them anything else, you tell them that's what they have to perform to be. So then it becomes an unconscious process, and it happens anywhere. It happens in academia. It happens in journalism. We are encouraged unconsciously to produce work that we know will get us a grant or get us a promotion or get us tenure. And we do it. And no one has to stand over you and threaten you. And that is the brilliance, really, of the most sophisticated model of propaganda that we actually have. And this is what Edward Bernays and many others have said for years, those who have shaped our so-called public relations apparatus. They have said the more you can get people to do without it being known that you're manipulating them, the more powerful you are. And this has been something that has garnered a tremendous amount of their energy and effort and resources and study to develop in terms of how to manipulate us without it being seen as manipulation. And to their credit, they're largely successful. So there are levels, of course, and variations of it, but it happens in many different ways. And I would argue that I and you and all of us are susceptible at various times, if not all the time, and need to be constantly vigilant. And that's why I keep saying when we like something, that's when we should be most critical and vigilant about what it is that we're being given.
As we close out, Jared, again, we want to encourage people to look at that book and read it again if they have it, and to pick it up if they haven't. It's called I Mix What I Like. And I think in 2019, as we see what some people have described as algorithm apartheid, meaning that, when you go online, you now have the Google and Facebook and other technology company apparatuses that will now direct you to particular sites and subject matter and artists that, oftentimes fulfill a particular agenda. So even though, I think we were talking about back in 2011 when you wrote the book, the response is like, yeah, Jared, that's cool, but I'm not trying to be on radio. I can just go on the internet. And the internet will set me free. But now that we saw that net neutrality protections are gone, and that these and that the internet is basically, for many people, social media, YouTube, and others, those are very controlled and very restrictive type of environments that, I think a lot of people are now seeing, especially with Facebook. You start to get radical, they will censor you and remove your account and keep you offline for 30 days at a time. And now what you're talking about, I think, is crystal clear because you no longer have that out with the internet. But one thing I just wanted to leave with is that when you were talking about the popularity of shows and how they're written, I think by far, if you talk to black people from particular generations, one of the most popular shows, bar none, was The Wire. And it was co-written by a Baltimore police detective who was very clear in my conversations with him that the system can't be reformed. And what he meant by the system is that the storylines that he had in The Wire whether it was Stringer Bell going legit or whether or not it was the drug cartel, the drug dealers, the black drug dealers coming together and forming a united front. He was very clear in my conversations, like that would not happen, can't happen, and won't happen in his writing, even though he had the power to move it in that direction. And I think when you talk about the maintaining of power dynamics, Ed Burns, who is that police detective, personifies that. There was no way he was going to have black unity or legitimize or black folks rising to the level of legitimizing themselves after having been on that wrong side of the track. We were always going to be perpetually failing in whatever show he was writing, if that makes sense.
No, I think it does make sense, and there's a lot of problems that I have with The Wire that we just don't have time to get into now. But you know, including that it maintains some of these same narratives about you know, not only why are in this case black people in certain conditions in certain communities, but why they're kept there and what forces are at play, what forces benefit. And it kind of walks away almost like what the film Crash did years ago with the idea of racism. It's like, well, everybody's just guilty, so therefore no one's guilty. And it just kind of irritated me in that level, like everybody's equally guilty and no one's really benefiting who's clearly identified and targeted and shown how they operate. But I thought that, you know, as you were talking about wrapping up, I did just want to say in terms of where we think we are, where we're headed, you know, what to me was sort of a drop the mic moment when it was announced, I think the last year or two, that Leo Cohen was going to be heading up YouTube Music, which is now the leading delivery mechanism of popular music. And it just, you know, for people of our age and our generation and who have been focused on music and hip hop for so long and who know the industry, you know, we know, you know, the nightmare that Leo Cohen has meant in terms of hip hop history. And to see him just reemerge, at least to me, it feels like a reemergence. I'm sure he's always been around. To reemerge as the head of still the head of the number one mechanism for delivering music, just shows again that even as we move into this new age of media technology, the same forces are still at play. The same ownership groups, the same mechanisms, the same elite owners. I mean, when we talk about the Vanguard group, the private equity group that owns practically damn near everything. You know, including YouTube and everything else. I mean, you know, when we look at these things and who they may put back to run it, we start to see the same. And then, as I always just, you know, most simply summarize, when we just look at the material conditions of everybody involved, and we look at the distribution of wealth. Every year, the United States creates around about $20 trillion of GDP. But almost all of that goes to the top 1%. So for some reason, it seems to me that even with all the abilities that we're supposed to have with social media and posting and tweeting and texting and everything, the wealth we create seems to end up in the same hands and increasingly in smaller amounts of those same hands. So, and again, in the United States, we're talking about 400 families, you know, the 1/10 of 1% that gets about 90 to 99% of all the actual wealth we create every year. So how does that get maintained? Well, that's why I keep arguing we have to look at the history and the function of propaganda. And I think that what I was trying to do with I Mix What I Like and whatever else is to try to say that if we look at our own histories and traditions and look at how they've been incorporated, pun intended, into the larger society, then we would learn so much about what our real relationship is and be, I think, I would have hoped or would like to think, less fooled by their continuing efforts to, make it more easy for us to just watch our wealth go farther and farther away, and the planet get more and more unequal and more unsafe as a result.
That's the voice of Jared Ball, Professor Jared Ball over at Morgan State, revisiting his book, I Mix What I Like, in 2019. It is a book that I think all of us would really benefit if we look at again and take in some of those concepts, as much of what he said is very clear as day without no rebuttal. That he was ahead of his time in some of the concepts that he was framing. And we can see that very clearly. So, Jared, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us this afternoon on Hard Knock Radio. And we look forward for your future projects.
Man, thank you. Appreciate all your work, and peace to Hard Knock and all your listeners out there. Take care.